When I first read Dittophobia, it was such a shocking story to receive. Like, when this thing first came out, I remember shaking my head just going, what? How does this work at all? But I reread the book recently, and now I think the story was trying to show us something more. Something that relates specifically to Michael Afton himself. Before I get too carried away though, I want to make sure you're aware that I do think Michael Afton is who is experiencing the nightmares from FNAF 4, as I have recently still seen some debate on the topic, but yeah, I just want to be clear that I think we're playing as Michael during these nights. So for me personally, the biggest reasons being me essentially just regurgitating points that other people already have talked about, such as the FNAF 1 phone call that plays during these nightmares. If Michael is who he played as in FNAF 1, to me it makes sense that this phone recording would show up in a nightmare that is his own. But the security logbook also seems to back up the idea of Michael as our player, especially since we see a nightmare animatronic drawn by who many agree absolutely has to be Michael. I'm not really here to discuss that today though, I just kind of wanted to let you know where I'm at. Instead, I want to go over how Michael got himself into this nightmare scenario in the first place, and in what way this series of events impacts the larger story, which I think ultimately gives us a closer look at Michael as a character, and may even answer a question or two we have about sister location. So first things first, we need to think back to the ending of FNAF 4, when crying child is passing on. Michael speaks to him and we read the following. He tells his brother that he's sorry. It's a genuinely tragic moment. Like, leading up to this, Michael has been a horrible brother. This becomes a heartfelt, guilt-ridden goodbye that Michael tells to his little bro. And the worst part is, that in Michael's mind, he knows it's his fault. Not only does he have to live with the guilt of his brother's death, but he has to live with how he treated him before this as well. This kind of unresolved guilt can absolutely destroy a person, both physically and mentally. It eats away at you and changes you. And unless you believe will care theory, it's also reasonable to assume that William isn't going to be much of a comfort to turn to during this time. And if I were to guess, I would argue that William probably uses Michael's guilt as leverage to get him to do what he wants. Ultimately, this could even be part of the reason Michael works for Fazbear as a security guard. Michael may be unable to forgive himself throughout the coming years and just agrees to whatever William wants him to do. As sad as it is, I also think this could explain why Michael is said to lack professionalism and has a bad odor after he gets fired from different Fazbear locations. If he was never able to process his grief and come to terms with his past, what motivation would he have to dedicate himself to his job? I find it hard to believe he has a lot of goals for his life at this point. The survival logbook even has a question listed, asking him to list 10 reasons why applying at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza seemed like a good idea at the time. Michael simply puts down one, which says, employees get free pizza. A man after my own heart. Pizza is a comfort food. It really is. Speaking from experience, sometimes eating helps you cope with life. It's not a great solution, but there is a strange comfort in eating tasty food. Why am I saying all this though? Well, I wanted to look a bit deeper into why this logbook may have mentioned some of Michael's favorite things. So I did some research that was basically looking into how people with depression and grief deal with it, and food is a factor that constantly comes up. Now, let me be upfront, I didn't go to like a university to find the most accurate info there is right now, but in the online searching I did, one thing I consistently kept running across is how depression causes cravings. One website I'll link below even explained that food plays a significant role in many events throughout people's lives, and depressed individuals may be subconsciously attempting to recreate positive feelings by excessively eating their favorite foods. So if the pizza place was somewhere that Michael enjoyed eating at before he lost his brother, which it clearly seemed to be due to him and his friends all dressing as Fazbear characters, this could help explain why it was so easy to get him to work at Fazbear's Pizza. But so you don't think that I'm just trying to throw random things at you, I also want to bring up his obsessive chewing gum habit that he mentions having in this same logbook. I think part of the reason this detail was brought into the book for us to find was to make us ask why. Why are we seeing this? And so after a bit of research, I stumbled upon a website where studies were done to find out if chewing gum is effective for reducing anxiety, and the studies showed that it actually was effective. I'll link that page below as well. And with the weight of his childhood guilt overtaking his mental state, it's more than reasonable for me to assume he doesn't keep up with personal hygiene and self-care, which is why his bad odor and unprofessionalism are mentioned. It's just a sad side note I thought I'd offer for consideration. All this to say, I'm just trying to give a closer look at Michael and where he may mentally be at during this point in his life. Anyway, how I see Michael's life playing out after the loss of not one, but two siblings, because we haven't even talked about Elizabeth, who also dies fairly early on in his life, depending on where you put her in the timeline. So he's lost two siblings. We also don't know much about Mrs. Afton, whether she's dead or whether she divorced William, or if they split, or what's going on with her. So there's so many family potential issues going on already, and as far as we know, William isn't necessarily a loving parent himself. So how I see things playing out here is that William convinces him to work as a security guard in FNAF 1, probably 2, and after he gets fired multiple times, William sees that he's not really helping much and decides decides he'll use him for something else, which would namely be these nightmare experiments. To bring Dittophobia into this, we could argue that Michael experiences the nightmares soon after Crying Child dies, but I again have to bring up the FNAF 1 phone call that's playing. That bit of info stops me from thinking these nightmares are happening to Michael as a child, but that's kind of a big issue here, right? If the nightmare events from FNAF 4 take place after FNAF 1 in the timeline, Michael would be an adult by the time of the experiments, correct? Yes, I agree with that. But if that's the case, how or why does he end up being experimented on if he's an adult? Does Michael just go along with this? Well, this is where Dittophobia comes in clutch. Tales from the Pizzaplex stories don't all line up seamlessly with the game timeline, most notably the Mimic story, which definitely has events playing out differently. Classic example being Fiona dying during childbirth instead of later on like in Secret of the Mimic. We still have similar story beats that occur in both representations of the story, they're just playing out differently both in the timeline and in how the event itself occurs in the first place. So to discuss Dittophobia, in this book our character Rory has actually been experimented on for years. He thinks that he's still a child, the hallucinogenic gas makes him truly believe that he's still a child in his bed during each night's simulation, but in reality, he's nearly an adult. I think something similar is happening to Michael here in the game timeline. While Michael couldn't have started the experiments as a child due to working at Fazbear locations first, in the experiments he still believes he's a child. It wouldn't matter if he actually is a child or not. And the reason it doesn't matter is in the motive of how he got here in the first place. See, at the end of Dittophobia, we learn that Rory wasn't actually kidnapped by William and put into the terrifying predicament he finds himself. What actually is revealed is that he chose this outcome. Well, to an extent. He was persuaded to choose this outcome. So towards the end of the book, after he's already seen that the nightmares are just illusions and that nearly everything he thought his life was is actually a lie, Rory hears a voice from a speaker talking to him. The voice is calm and soothing. It's very convincing to Rory, and it seems to be like quite smooth talking and manipulative, but he doesn't know that. And in this book, William reminds Rory that Rory actually ran away from home, that Rory didn't fit in at school, he had so much trouble in school, he always felt so stupid, he was essentially an outcast. He only had one friend. The voice further reminds him how the girls thought he was a wimp, and how only here in the bunker was he truly ever taken care of. Even his parents were never there for him. They were always away from home working, and when his mom would come home, she'd just tell him how many things that Rory did wrong. See, what Afton's doing here is he's preying upon every insecurity that Rory has, using it to convince him that this is what was for the best. In the same way, think of how incredibly easy it'd be for William to convince Michael that this would be such a perfect outcome. It'd be so helpful. I can imagine such a similar scenario. Michael likely had no friends after the bite. All his friends may have felt as much guilt as he did and could certainly distance themselves from him, especially if he himself is maybe withdrawing or shutting down mentally. Grief is hard enough in itself, but living in a toxic family makes it even worse. And having a second sibling taken from him just makes everything even more awful. Or maybe Michael did still have one friend, the Bonnie bully. Could that be Cassie's dad? Man, that'd be such a cool story. But anyway, if Michael's dealing with the loss of his brother, it must have been even worse losing his sister. So really, all William would have to convince him of is that he might be able to bring his brother back, something Michael would know is possible from the supernatural occurrences during his security guard gigs. Stretching the idea a little bit here, but maybe that's even part of why William wanted him working there in the first place, to show him that life after death was possible. It was all a build-up to prove to him that becoming an experiment would be the best course of action, essentially William using Michael's guilt to try and bring his brother back. We further know that Michael is aware of the other victims, as in his speech to William at the end of Sister Location, he mentions that
they were all there. They didn't recognize me at first, but then they thought I was you.
They were all there, which to me seems as if the game's trying to tell us that William did indeed slightly fill Michael in on what was going on. William wouldn't have to include the fact that agreeing to these tests would be a terrifying experience, he'd just fill him in on the necessary info, that this research will enable William to bring his family back to life, but he needs more information to fully reunite them. So Michael's the key. He'd just have to smooth talk Michael like he does Rory, essentially. I can just imagine the scene. William being the theatrical guy that he is, spouting off some BS to Michael like, the same Michael Afton who created all this mess now has a chance at redeeming himself, of saving his brother, his family. And if Michael's headspace is anything like I think it might be, he would probably jump at this opportunity. A chance to make amends. to do things over with his siblings. Moving on though, I think that Dittophobia also answers how William was able to talk to Michael about putting his sister back together, even after dying in the Springlock suit. And so depending on where you put things in the timeline, maybe that's not a big deal for you. So I suppose it's possible that William had this conversation with Michael about putting Elizabeth back together face to face, getting Springlocked during the events of Sister Location. It almost makes more sense to me though that what actually happened is William left Michael a pre-recorded message, like he does with Rory in this book. If William was monitoring Michael's fear results daily, how does Michael break free from this cycle in the game timeline? If William just shuts everything off after a few nights of experimenting, does Michael just get to wake up and go about his day? Wouldn't that defeat the purpose of what William's doing here? And wouldn't that also mean Michael would already know about the Sister Location bunker and everything relating to it? I suppose it's possible. It just feels even more confusing to me if that's the case. If Dittophobia is applicable narratively to the game timeline, to me it seems like William never intended to free Michael from these experiments, but rather leaves him there with a pre-recorded message just in case. A pre-recorded message would begin to play for Michael just like it does for Rory. When the generator powering this hallucinogenic gas fails, the tape begins to play, informing Michael that he successfully finished the experiments and now needs to go fix his sister for William. And Michael, buying into the convincing performance William puts on, the performance that's tugging at every vulnerability that Michael has, goes ahead and does it. Michael immediately goes to put his sister back together. We know that much. This is where the events of Sister Location would then begin. And unfortunately, we know what happens to Michael next. So after the Sister Location events transpire, Michael's eyes are open to the true nature of his father. He's no longer Team William. And this really does answer that Sister Location question that I've had for a while. How are these two characters communicating? I always wondered why Michael wouldn't know where William is if William had just told him to go fix his sister, and Michael's now responding to him. Michael wasn't talking directly to William, rather, William had left him a pre-recorded message that only triggered once the simulation wore out, just like in Rory's case. And maybe Michael's doing the same thing here. It doesn't seem like he knows yet that his dad's been spring-locked. So when we hear the line,
"I'm going to come find you,"
Michael doesn't know where his dad is. Now, to be fair though, there does seem to be a chunk of time that could have passed before Michael gives William this speech, as Michael does mention that he's been living in shadows. But is that due to him hiding, or is that him remarking on what's literally been happening to him for years? To me, it kind of narratively feels better that he makes this speech shortly after the Sister Location events transpired. But since we do see him walking down the street for several days and then barfing out Ennard, he could be talking about after that time, and that since people are hiding from him now and Ennard's literally not part of him, at that point Elizabeth is free now. It's kind of up to how you interpret things, honestly. The events playing out slightly differently in the books is in my opinion simply due to the same reason the Mimic story events play out slightly differently. The books aren't meant to be a one-to-one portrayal of the story, they are just there to help us understand the game's lore more thoroughly. So how I see it, essentially Rory is just a book fill-in for Michael Afton himself. The events are slightly different, but the result is obedience to William in both cases. As far as we know, Michael doesn't stumble upon any other children being experimented on while he roams the bunker in Sister Location, and since there are no other children present, to me that seems to imply that Michael may have been the one that was experimented on. Furthermore, if Michael did see those cameras where the experiments were taking place, he'd be able to put this all together in his mind. But that's about it. That's what I got for today. Both of these poor guys are manipulated in the end and tricked by William. But with Michael, we know the story doesn't end here. And that's where I want to leave this video at. But next time, we need to talk about what happens to Michael after FNAF 6, with the assumption that he survived. As always, thank you for being here and have a fantastic evening.